Welcome to Fast Keto. I'm your host, Ketogenic Girl. Hey guys, welcome to this week's episode of Fast Keto. Today is a little bit different format than usual. I am doing kind of a basics for beginners on keto series that is going to be useful even if you've been doing keto for a really long time, because it is really incorporating some of the fundamental sort of principles behind biochemistry and keto and why it works so well, and how to get the most results, the most benefits, how to burn fat the most rapidly on keto, how to incorporate intermittent fasting on keto, and why it helps so much with burning fat and fat loss and overall wellness and healing. And basically just some of the major first principles when it comes to the biochemistry of how our bodies work, and also why eating more protein can help you burn more fat. So I put together these 4 segments for you, and they're basically kind of basics for beginners on keto, and I hope that you enjoy them. Feel free to share your feedback with me on Instagram or Facebook. I love hearing from you guys and knowing what stuck with you, what stood out for you, and what you found most helpful. But I'm really incorporating a lot of your feedback, and I'm really hearing you and what you want to know the most, and really focusing my content on delivering that to you guys, just making keto understandable, easy, and really the approaches that make it the most effective and get you the best results. So I hope you enjoy today's episode of Fast Keto. All right, guys, I want to talk today about carbs and why starch control is so important on a ketogenic diet. Now, starches in plants are actually stored sugars. So in our bodies, we have something called glycogen, and glycogen is stored glucose. So when we intake food, our body converts it into glucose or takes any glucose that we've ingested, and it stores it for later in our liver and in our muscle tissues in the form of glycogen. Now, plants do the same thing with sugars, and they store them in concentrated forms called starches. So if you eat a plant food that's really high in starch, what it means is that it's high in stored sugars. And that's why we control starches and minimize carb intake so much in order to get into a ketogenic fat burning state. Now, your body has the ability to be either a sugar burner or a fat burner at any time. And the way that we get our bodies into a fat burning state is by depleting glycogen. That's our body's stored energy in the form of stored carbs. And we can do that in lots of different ways. If you follow a low carb or a ketogenic diet, over time, you're going to be storing less glycogen, so you're going to deplete it quicker. You're going to get into that fat-fueled state quicker, and you're going to get into that glucagon-dominant state, which means that your body is primarily burning fat for fuel. Now, when we eat a meal in a typical day, we go into what's called the absorptive state. So after eating, your body is absorbing all the nutrients that you've eaten. It's breaking things down in the form of digestion, and it does that for about 4 hours. And in that period of time, the body's dominant fuel is glucose. So you're burning sugar. After 4 hours, your body transitions into what's called the post-absorptive state. And in that state, glucagon becomes dominant because insulin, the hormone that is for energy storage, gets low enough that glucagon can then dominate. And what glucagon does is it puts us in a catabolic state where we're breaking things down. Insulin is more of an anabolic building state where we're building fat, we're synthesizing fat, we're storing fat for later. And glucagon is the hormone that tells the body to break down stored energy, and the dominant fuel of our post-absorptive state is fatty acids. So our body's dominant fuel when we're in the glucagon dominant state is fat, and we're burning fat. And while we're burning our stored fat, we're also making ketones, and that's why we start to be able to measure ketones in the form of beta hydroxybutyrate in the blood, in these different formats in our breath and our urine, which is excreted as a byproduct of that. So we want to get into that fat burning state, and the best way to do that is to keep glycogen storage low, and that's why we follow a ketogenic diet where we minimize the intake of high starch foods. That's foods with a lot of stored sugars. I want to talk all about fat burning and how to become fat fueled doing a ketogenic or low carb diet. Now, the body will burn two different forms of fuel. It's either going to be burning sugar or glucose, or it's going to be burning fat or stored fat. Now, in order to minimize our body's fat stores, we want to be burning our own stored body fat. Now, after we eat a meal, our body goes into what's known as the absorptive state. And it is breaking down all the nutrients from what we just ate so that it can absorb them and utilize them and store them for energy later. About 4 hours after eating a meal, our body goes into what's known as the post-absorptive state. And in that time, insulin, which is the hormone that tells your body to store fat and make fat, it goes down low enough that glucagon starts to rise. And glucagon is the opposite hormone to insulin. When glucagon is dominant, our primary fuel is body fat. And that's why we like to measure ketones, because ketones are produced as a byproduct of burning our stored body fat. So in order to burn body fat, we want to make sure we're not taking in any ketones in the form of any ketone supplements or things, because we only want to measure ketones if we're measuring them from our own stored body fat being broken down and utilized for fuel. You don't have to test your ketones in order to know that you're in ketosis. You can also just test your blood sugar, or you can also just go by the fit of your clothing or measuring your weight with a scale or doing body composition measurements. There's lots of different ways to measure your body fat. My favorite is the fit of my jeans, and the fit of my favorite jeans. My jeans, my smallest pair of jeans, are fitting better than ever, and I haven't lost weight on the scale. That's because my body is a fat burning machine. It's burning through fat, it's adding muscle, it's adding weight from the form of muscle and denser bones. And that's what I want to have. I want to have strong muscles and strong bones and not a ton of stored body fat that I don't need. Now, our body stores body fat for us so well because it wants us to survive. And I'm glad that my body does that for me, but I don't need all this excess stored fat on my body. So I want to burn through it. I want to be fat fueled. And the best way to do that is to follow a diet that keeps carbs and high starch plant foods to a minimum. The reason for that is starches are stored sugars in plants and vegetables. And if we eat a lot of plant foods that are high in starch, our body's going to burn through those first. If we are eating a lot of supplemental ketones or taking ketone supplements, our body's going to burn through that first before accessing our stored fuel. If we're eating a lot of glucose in general, it's going to prevent us from burning fat, because the body only switches to that glucagon dominant stage once we have lowered insulin enough. And the way to get low, steady insulin levels is by following a low carb or ketogenic diet. I want to talk to you a little bit about intermittent fasting and why it's so important for getting into a fat-fueled state. Now, typically when we eat food, our body goes into what's called the absorptive state for about 4 hours after eating a meal. In that time, our body's breaking down nutrients and absorbing them. And our body's main fuel during that time is glucose or sugar. It's not until about 4 hours after eating a meal that we get into what is called the post-absorptive state. And it's in that state that we're then able to go into a glucagon dominant mode. So during the first 4 hours after eating a meal, insulin is the hormone that is predominating in the body. And it's because it is the hormone of storage. And it tells the body to put and synthesize more fat to be in fat storing mode so that we have energy to access later when we need it if we don't have food readily available. It's not until about 4 hours after eating a meal that we actually go into the post-absorptive state. And in that state, insulin gets low enough that glucagon, the antithetic hormone to insulin, becomes dominant. When glucagon becomes dominant in the post-absorptive state, we then are fueled primarily by fat. Glucagon tells our body to stop making and assimilating fat and to burn fat. And as a byproduct of this, we get ketones. And that's why we're able to measure ketones in our blood in the form of beta hydroxybutyrate. We're able to measure it in these different forms because our body is making ketones as a byproduct of breaking down fat. And that's how we can know that we're in a fat-fueled, fat-burning mode. Now, this is only if you're doing a ketogenic diet or a diet that gets you into a state of ketosis. If you're drinking or ingesting exogenous ketones, any kinds of ketones that you're taking by pills or drinks, now you may see ketones being reflected on your meter, but that doesn't mean that your body's burning fat, because your body's going to burn through any ketones that you take in the form of supplements first before burning your own body fat. Why? Because ketones actually have a caloric value. So if you are taking in all these ketones and MCT oil and all these kinds of supplements, your body's going to burn through those first before it gets to your own body fat. So if you don't take any of those kinds of supplements and you just follow a diet that is either high or moderate in fat, it gives you lots of healthy protein, and it is controlling the starches and keeping carbs and higher starch vegetables and fruits to a minimum, then your body is able to then switch into that fat burning mode more quickly. And if you do intermittent fasting, which means after maybe dinner time, you fast until later, sort of mid-morning or midday, you're then going to be in the post-absorptive state for a longer period of time where your body is burning fat as its dominant fuel. And that's why intermittent fasting can be such an effective tool to go with a ketogenic diet. When you are fat-fueled, you actually rely on food from external sources less because you can tap into your body's stored fat for energy anytime. And it makes you a lot less reliant on having to eat every couple of hours because you're fat-fueled, you're a fat-burning machine. I want to talk to you about optimizing your body composition and how eating more protein, moderating your fat, and controlling your starches can help you actually burn more body fat, build more muscle and lean mass, and get stronger bones. Now, I've been experimenting with this for several months, doing a higher protein intake, moderating my fat down so that I can burn more stored body fat, and also controlling starches. I have another video which you can watch on starches and why starches are stored sugars in plant foods and why keeping them to a minimal intake is what helps us get into our fat burning mode. So we can burn sugar or we can burn fat at any time during the day. And it's by keeping our stored sugar, our stored glycogen low, and by practicing intermittent fasting so that we can burn through our stored glycogen, we can get into the post-absorptive state and we can burn more body fat. Now, I've been trying this out for several months, and not only have I been able to stay in ketosis and burn more fat, build more muscle, but I have maintained ketosis the entire time, which I love because I love having more energy, having more mental clarity, and just having an overall great feeling from being in a state of nutritional ketosis. So I have the original 28-day challenge that I've been running for a few years, and I just launched the phase 2 plans, which have a higher protein intake. So if you want to try out for yourself doing a higher protein intake and getting into ketosis, you can try out the phase 2 meal plans as a part of the 20-day challenge. It also comes with my support and guidance in our Facebook members group. So you don't have to go it alone. I will be there supporting you with any questions that you have as you go along. So you can check out the phase 2 meal plans at ketogenicgirl.com.
few disclaimers. By listening to this podcast, you agree not to use this podcast as medical advice, as I am not a qualified healthcare provider. The information presented on this podcast is for educational purposes only. Ketogenic Girl is not qualified to provide medical advice. Consult your own physician for any medical issues that you may be having. This entire disclaimer also applies to any guests or contributors to this podcast. Prior to beginning a ketogenic diet, you should undergo a full health screening with your physician to confirm that a keto diet is suitable for you and to rule out any conditions or contraindications that may pose risks or that are incompatible with a ketogenic diet. A keto diet may or may not be appropriate for you if you have any kind of health condition, whether known to you or unknown. So you must consult your physician to find this out. Anyone under the age of 18 should consult with their physician and their parents or legal guardian.